The evening before the science competition, Jake and his crush, Olivia, planned to go street racing. It was their way of releasing stress, but I knew how dangerous it could be. I couldn't let him risk everything like that. So I did what I thought was right. I told his parents. They stopped him, and I believed I'd made the correct choice. But the next day, news broke. A group of teens had been racing that night. Two didn't survive. One was severely injured, and Olivia was gone forever. Jake never held it against me. Not then, not even years later when he proposed. I thought we'd moved beyond it. But on our wedding day, as we drove to the venue, the car's brakes failed. I remember the impact, the agony, the crimson. I reached toward him, desperate, but he just gave me a cold smile. "Now do you understand what it feels like?" he asked. "To be trapped, knowing you won't make it?" His voice trembled with emotion. "Does it hurt? Olivia was only 18. You got 10 more years than she did." I lost my life that day, not just physically, but emotionally, realizing he'd never forgiven me. I became a spirit, watching as Jake played the role of grieving husband. He shed tears at my funeral, consoled my family, and gradually took over our business. He manipulated everyone during their grief, taking everything we'd built. Eventually, he even pushed my parents to their breaking point. When it was finished, I watched him visit Olivia's resting place, bottle in hand. "I did it for you," he whispered. I wanted to scream that our years together meant nothing to him, that I'd been insignificant compared to someone he'd known briefly. If I could return, I'd never have interfered. I'd have let him choose his path, even if it meant losing him. Then, I woke up. Back in Greenwood, on that crucial night, Jake stood before me, jacket over his shoulder, ready to race. I grabbed his arm, begging him not to go. "My decisions aren't your concern," he snapped, pulling away. His eyes were distant, impatient. In my previous life, that look had frightened me into action. I'd been so convinced stopping him was right that I'd created a scene with his parents until they made him stay home. But the following day, we learned several students had perished racing on that very road. Now, facing this moment again, I felt the weight of my choices. Should I intervene again, or let him face whatever came? Experience had taught me that interfering had consequences, but so did inaction. Before, I thought protecting Jake was right. I never imagined my actions would trigger a nightmare I couldn't escape. Now I realized I couldn't control everything. So, I released his arm. "Fine," I said firmly. "From now on, your life is yours to live." Jake paused, clearly surprised by my response, but his surprise quickly faded. Without another word, he climbed onto his motorcycle, a purchase his parents weren't aware of, and disappeared into the darkness. I watched him leave with mixed feelings of relief and anxiety. This time, I'd let him go. But at what price? The next morning, my phone alerted me to breaking news. Teen street racing incident, 10 dead, 2 injured. My heart dropped. Jake and Olivia had survived, but not without consequences. Jake had fractures in his arm and leg, while Olivia was seriously injured. Fate had unfolded differently than I expected. By not stopping him, I'd allowed him to endanger Olivia too. Our families were close, so my parents insisted we visit the hospital. Jake's mother was devastated, eyes puffy from tears. She held my hand, voice shaking. "Sarah, he listens to you. Please, help him through this." I nodded, but wondered if he really valued my input or had just tolerated me because I'd been persistent before. Maybe that's why resentment grew, because I'd always tried controlling him. I approached Jake's bedside. Despite his casts, he looked content. He smiled at me, eyes bright. "Yesterday, Olivia agreed to be my girlfriend," he announced proudly. It felt like he was deliberately hurting me, ensuring I knew I had no place in his life anymore. But I wouldn't show my pain. Instead, I changed topics. I guess you'll miss the science competition now. His smile vanished. Physics was Liam's one true talent. It had earned him a spot in the national competition, and everyone had high hopes for him. In my past life, he'd taken first place, securing a special admission to a top university. But now, with his injuries, that dream was out of reach. For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Maybe he was starting to realize the cost of his choices. When I found out about Liam's injury, I knew he wouldn't be able to compete in the physics competition. So, I called our teacher and offered to take his place. After a moment of hesitation, the teacher agreed. My grades in physics were just as good as Liam's, and in my past life, I'd been a university physics professor. A high school competition was nothing to me. Liam's face darkened when he heard the news, but he quickly forced a smile. "It's fine," he said, trying to sound casual. "I can still take the college entrance exams with Emma." I didn't respond. I just smiled and let the silence hang between us. Then, chaos erupted outside the hospital room. Emma had woken up and wanted to see Liam, but she ran into Mrs. Miller, Liam's mother, in the hallway. Mrs. Miller was furious. She blamed Emma for Liam's injuries and didn't hold back. The sound of a sharp slap echoed through the corridor. "You little vixen!" Mrs. Miller shouted. "If it weren't for you, my son wouldn't be lying in that hospital bed. Do you know how important this year is for him?" Emma's voice trembled as she tried to defend herself. I'll take responsibility for Liam. Please don't hit me, Auntie." Her words were soft, pleading, and perfectly calculated to make her sound like the victim. Liam, hearing the commotion, panicked. He tried to get out of bed, but with his injuries, he lost his balance and crashed to the floor with a loud thud. I stood there, watching him struggle. For a moment, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. He looked up at me, desperation in his eyes, silently begging for help. He didn't want Emma to see him like this, weak and helpless, but I didn't move. Instead, I turned and walked toward the door. In a loud, clear voice, I said, "Mrs. Miller, Liam heard you hitting someone. He got so agitated that he fell out of bed." By now, a crowd had gathered outside, drawn by the drama. When I opened the door, all eyes turned to Liam, sprawled on the floor, unable to get up. The looks on their faces were a mix of pity and mockery. The Millers were nouveau riche, and Mrs. Miller had spent years grooming Liam to fit into high society. Now, here he was, humiliated in front of everyone. Mrs. Miller had spent years molding Liam into the perfect son, polished, poised, and presentable. But all that effort crumbled in an instant when he threw it all away for Emma. Now, lying on the hospital floor, humiliated and injured, he was anything but the image of perfection his mother had worked so hard to create. Mrs. Miller's resentment toward Emma burned hotter than ever. Another argument broke out in the hallway, but I didn't stick around to watch. I turned away, a quiet sense of satisfaction settling in my chest. When I returned to school, Emma was already there. Somehow, a rumor had started spreading, one that painted Liam as a hero. According to the story, he'd bravely shielded Emma from danger during the race, sacrificing himself to save her. It didn't take long for the tale to become the talk of the senior class. For students drowning in the stress of exams, it was the perfect distraction. "Liam's amazing," someone whispered in the hallway. "He's like the male lead in a novel, pushing the girl out of harm's way and facing danger alone." "Yeah, it's too bad he can't compete in the physics competition anymore," another voice chimed in. "But saving someone like that? That's real courage." As they spoke, their eyes drifted toward me, filled with pity. Everyone knew Liam and I had grown up together. They assumed I must be heartbroken, watching the boy I'd known my whole life risk everything for someone else. But they were wrong. I didn't care about their drama. My focus was on one thing: getting into a top university. In my past life, I'd always been a top student. But right before the college entrance exams, Liam had asked me out, saying he wanted to help me relax. On our way, we'd run into a gang of thugs. I'd been beaten, my arm left bruised and swollen. Liam, though, had walked away without a scratch. Despite the pain, I'd forced myself to take the exam, but my scores had suffered. I couldn't get into my dream school, one of the country's best universities. Back then, I'd been devastated, ready to retake the exams. But Liam, ever the comforting presence, had convinced me to attend the same second-tier university as him. At the time, I'd thought he was being kind. I'd believed that with him by my side, nothing else mattered. But now, looking back, too many things about that night didn't add up. Had Liam planned it all? Had he been plotting against me even then? This time, I wasn't taking any chances. I asked my father for a bodyguard, someone to watch over me from a distance. Even though in this life, I hadn't done anything to wrong Liam, he was still unpredictable. Who knew what he might try? Having a bodyguard gave me peace of mind. What I didn't expect, though, was that the first person my bodyguard would have to deal with wasn't Liam. It was Emma. After school, Emma cornered me near an alleyway. Before I could even react, she grabbed my wrist and yanked me into a secluded spot. Several gang members were already waiting there, their smirks sending a chill down my spine. Emma stood among them, dressed in a pristine white dress, her long black hair flowing like a scene from a movie. She looked every bit the school goddess, beautiful, innocent, and untouchable. But the way she leaned against the gang leader, Logan, told a different story. Her voice was sweet, but her words were venomous. "Logan, this is Liam's little childhood sweetheart. I guarantee she's still a virgin. Ruin her for me, and I'll finally have Liam all to myself. When I have money in the future, I won't forget you guys." I stared at them, my face blank, as if I were looking at a pile of garbage. In my past life, I'd known about Emma's true nature. She'd always surrounded herself with men, using them for her own gain. Liam had been just one of many. I'd tried to warn him once, but he'd lashed out at me. "Emma's already dead. Can you stop tarnishing her name?" he'd snapped. After that, I'd never mentioned her again. To Liam, she was a saint, a girl with a heart of gold who'd been taken too soon. He never saw the real her. Emma smirked, her confidence unshaken. "Don't worry, Logan," she said, her tone dripping with false reassurance. "Her family isn't as powerful as Liam's. Even if something happens, I'll just sweet-talk him, and he'll take care of it." I almost laughed. "It was Emma!" Logan screamed, his voice cracking as he pointed at her. "She made me do it! It was all her idea!" Emma, pale and trembling, collapsed to the ground, her legs giving out beneath her. I looked down at her, my expression calm but firm. "You treat Liam like he's some kind of treasure," I said, my voice steady. "But to me, he's nothing more than trash. Don't ever try to drag me into your mess again. He's not worth it." Emma opened her mouth to argue, but one glance at my bodyguard silenced her. She bit her lip, tears welling in her eyes, and stayed quiet. From that day on, she never dared to approach me again. Instead, she poured all her energy into Liam. Every day after school, she rushed to the hospital, staying by his side late into the night. She played the role of the devoted caretaker, tending to his every need with exaggerated care. But it wasn't just about love. Emma had other plans. She made sure to appear fragile and helpless, using her tears and soft words to manipulate Liam into giving her money. Emma was known in school for coming from a poor family. She'd even earned the nickname Cafeteria Belle for working in the school canteen. So when she started asking Liam for money, he didn't hesitate. He handed over whatever she wanted, telling her to ask for more if it wasn't enough. Emma's spending habits quickly spiraled out of control. She began flaunting designer clothes and expensive accessories, surrounded by a group of followers who once mocked her for being poor. Now they trailed behind her, too afraid to say a word. But whispers still spread. "So what if she's got Liam now?" someone muttered. "Does she really think she's special? She's just using him to get what she wants." That wasn't entirely true, though. While Emma had been involved with other men, her relationship with Liam had always stayed innocent. They'd never crossed any physical boundaries. The money, however, was a different story. Liam gave it to her willingly, but a high school student living in a hospital and spending money like water was bound to raise eyebrows. When Mrs. Miller found out, she was furious. Her son had ended up in the hospital because of Emma, and now the girl was draining his wallet behind her back. Storming into the hospital room, Mrs. Miller didn't hold back. She slapped Emma across the face, grabbed her by the hair, and unleashed her anger in a series of blows. Emma, ever the delicate damsel, didn't fight back. She endured it all, her tear-filled eyes playing the victim perfectly. Liam, watching the woman he adored being mistreated, struggled to get out of bed. He shielded Emma with his own body, glaring. That night, Liam and Emma ran away from the hospital together. The Miller household erupted into chaos, sending out search parties to find them. When I got home, my parents were still discussing the situation. "Liam always seemed like such a good kid," my dad said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Who would have thought he'd cause such a mess over a girl?" I shrugged casually. "Maybe they're just deeply in love," I said. After all, in my past life, Liam had spent over a decade patiently plotting his revenge for Emma. If that wasn't love, what was? My mom shot me a sharp look, as if worried I might be speaking from personal experience. She immediately launched into a lecture about the dangers of dating as a student, her tone stern and protective. It wasn't until I reassured her repeatedly that I wasn't interested in anyone that she finally let the topic drop. Time passed, and the day of the physics competition arrived. I competed, confident and focused, and by the time I returned, Liam was back at school too, though he hadn't fully recovered. He showed up every day with Emma by his side, faithfully pushing his wheelchair. A handsome guy, a beautiful girl, and what seemed like a touching love story. Naturally, people envied them. But what was more ridiculous was how little they cared about being discreet. No matter where you went on campus, you could find them acting intimately, as if the entire school existed solely for their romance. During gym class, while the rest of us were playing sports or studying, Liam and Emma hid under a tree, lost in their own world. The sounds they made were impossible to ignore, wet, obscene, and shameless. Some of my classmates turned bright red with embarrassment, while others exchanged awkward glances. Finally, one of the bolder students snapped. "This isn't your personal romance novel," they shouted in their direction. "Could you stop acting like you're in heat all the time? You might not care about your reputation, but the rest of us do." The sounds behind the tree stopped abruptly. Moments later, Emma emerged, pushing Liam's wheelchair. Her face was flushed, but she managed to look both embarrassed and indignant. "How could you eavesdrop on us?" she said, her voice soft and trembling, as if she were the one wronged. "We were already trying to be discreet." Her words only made things worse. Unlike Liam, the rest of my classmates weren't fooled by her act. Hearing her twisted reasoning, they were furious. "Discreet?" someone muttered under their breath. "You were practically putting on a show." The argument between Emma and the students escalated quickly. Hands on their hips, they scolded her without holding back. No matter how skilled Emma was at manipulation, she was no match for an entire group. Liam stood protectively in front of Emma, gripping her wrist tightly with his uninjured hand. He looked like some kind of knight shielding his princess, his expression unwavering as he declared to everyone present, "I love Emma. No one can separate us." I frowned deeply at that moment. The way he stood there, so defiant and self-assured, reminded me of the man he would become, the man who had spent years plotting revenge for a girl who had never truly loved him. It was a chilling glimpse of the future, and it made me more determined than ever to stay far away from his chaos. Emma's words hung in the air like poison. "She's been pulling away since your accident. She looks down on you now. I'm the only one who truly cares." I watched her face light up with malicious satisfaction as Liam's expression clouded over. "Remember this conversation," she hissed at me. "Don't come begging for his attention later." Was this girl delusional? How many times did I need to spell it out? I had zero interest in Liam. Before I could respond, the office door swung open with authority. My father stood there, his presence immediately commanding the room. "Who does this boy think he is?" he said coolly. "That my daughter would waste a single moment on him." Everyone froze. Dad had brought my forgotten competition materials, a small kindness during his busy day. He certainly hadn't expected to walk into this drama. There was something in his stance, a quiet power that made her smugness was suffocating. I smiled knowingly. The Millers were on the brink of financial collapse, yet Liam still purchased extravagant gifts for Emma. Such devotion deserved recognition. So during a seemingly innocent conversation, I accidentally mentioned these expensive presents to Mrs. Miller. When she discovered Liam's lavish spending on Emma, she burst into our classroom, grabbed Emma by her hair, and dragged her into the hallway. "You shameless little tramp," she screamed. "All you do is seduce my son and take his money." Before the Millers had acquired their wealth, Mrs. Miller had worked countless back-breaking jobs. Mrs. Miller's strength was shocking. In seconds, she had Emma pinned to the floor, her hand cracking across Emma's face again and again. Emma's delicate skin bloomed with angry red marks under the assault. Liam struggled desperately from his wheelchair, only to tumble helplessly onto the ground. All he could do was watch in horror as Emma eventually went limp. Word spread later that Emma had fainted because of pregnancy complications triggered by the stress. When I heard this, I nearly choked in disbelief. Pregnant? That was impossible. In my previous life, medical tests had confirmed beyond doubt that Liam was completely sterile. He could never father children. There was no question about it. The truth was obvious. Someone else had fathered that baby. I'd naively assumed Emma would end her other relationships once she'd secured Liam. But apparently, she'd been bold enough to continue her affairs, and now faced the consequences. Despite this, Emma brazenly insisted the baby belonged to Liam. Her performance was so convincing that she managed to move into the Miller household. Gossip circulated that the family treasured the unborn child, providing Emma with premium care and nutrition, treating her like royalty. Liam even abandoned his education to stay home and attend to her every need. Our classmates were divided. Some sighed dreamily. If I had someone who loved me that deeply, I wouldn't mind having a baby early either. I heard they're planning to take their college entrance exams together after the birth. Others were more practical. Throwing away your education for a baby? How incredibly foolish. I wholeheartedly agreed with the latter. Getting tangled in romantic drama was the worst mistake any student could make. As senior year intensified, our study sessions stretched later into the night. Returning home after one such evening, I accidentally overheard a heated exchange between Liam and his mother in their courtyard. If the men in this family weren't all infertile, do you think I would have let her stay? Mrs. Miller's voice was cruel with contempt. Once that baby arrives, I'm sending it away. She has no place among us. You can't do that, Mom, Liam shouted back. Just because Dad had fertility issues doesn't mean I have the same problem. Emma and I will have many more children. She's going to be the mother of my children. You can't throw her out. So Liam remained oblivious to his own infertility. He was genuinely excited about becoming a father. I couldn't help but smile darkly. If he was this invested and hopeful now, Wouldn't the truth be all the more devastating when the baby finally arrived? I decided to let Liam enjoy his fantasy a while longer. My attention shifted entirely to academics, though snippets about their household drama still reached me through the school gossip mill. Emma had apparently shed her sweet facade once she secured her position in the Miller home. The pregnant princess now ruled with an iron fist. When insomnia struck at midnight, she'd make sure everyone suffered alongside her. Whenever cravings hit, Liam became her personal delivery boy, with the unborn child serving as her ultimate bargaining chip. Get me what I want, or who knows what might happen to the baby. The once proud Miller family had become prisoners in their own home. I barely recognized Liam when I glimpsed him months later. Exhaustion had hollowed his features, leaving him a shell of his former self. I walked past without acknowledgement, focusing instead on my upcoming physics competition. When the results were announced, first place, I knew my path to my dream university was nearly secured. The award would significantly boost my entrance exam score. That evening, Liam sought me out. I instinctively stepped back, maintaining a safe distance between us. His laugh was hollow, defeated. Do we really need to be like this? The question struck me as odd. Our relationship had crumbled beyond salvation long ago. As I turned to leave, his voice stopped me. Nina, I had this dream. I won first place in the physics competition. My heart skipped. Had memories from his past life somehow surfaced? I studied his face carefully before responding coldly. Sounds like nothing but a dream. You can't even hold a pen now. How could you possibly take an exam? His silence was my cue to walk away without a backward glance. From that day forward, my phone buzzed constantly with messages from Liam. Each text described another dream, attending the same university, our dating life, even his proposal. Eventually, I blocked his number in frustration. I refused to let that worthless man disrupt my concentration. Whenever we encountered each other, his eyes brimmed with complicated emotions, words clearly forming on his lips. I positioned my bodyguard directly between us, creating an impenetrable barrier. Eventually, Liam began avoiding me altogether. I suspected his dreams had revealed his past cruelties toward me. Good riddance. Without his interference, I could dedicate myself completely to my studies. Like every other senior, I became a studying machine, rising with the sun and working well into the night. On the evening before our entrance exams, my mother grew concerned about my relentless schedule. You need fresh air, she insisted repeatedly, until I finally agreed to meet some friends. I ventured out reluctantly, only to freeze halfway down the street. There he was, the same thug who'd broken my arm before my exams in my previous life. A chill ran through me, but this time, my bodyguard reacted instantly, tackling the man to the ground and hauling him straight to the police station. As I watched them disappear, confusion washed over me. Why was this happening again? I had no connection to Liam in this timeline. The pattern made no sense, yet here it was, repeating itself. My bodyguard rushed me home where my parents, upon hearing what happened, spent the entire night on edge. When morning came, they personally escorted me to the examination hall with additional security flanking us on all sides. After completing my exams, I contacted the private investigator I'd hired. Since my rebirth, I'd been quietly gathering intelligence on Emma, collecting damning evidence including photographs documenting her encounters with multiple men. I'd initially kept this information as insurance, but Liam's continued hostility had erased any inclination toward mercy. The day Emma delivered her baby, I arranged for the photos to be delivered to the Miller residence. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Their household erupted in chaos, Mrs. Miller hurling vicious insults at Emma's character, Mr. Miller destroying furniture in his rage. Throughout the storm, Liam remained eerily silent, his eyes dark and empty. The family abandoned Emma at the hospital that same day, refusing to pay a single cent of her medical expenses. Within a week, Emma appeared outside the Miller estate, clutching her newborn, sobbing desperately. "I gave birth to your family's child and you throw me away like garbage? Where is your conscience?" Her once perfect figure had lost its grace, her flawless complexion now marked by exhaustion. Her hysterical cries transformed her into something unrecognizable, a desperate, worn-down woman far removed from the delicate beauty she'd once been. The Millers remained inside, letting her bake under the merciless sun as her pleas went unanswered. A crowd slowly gathered, murmuring among themselves as the spectacle unfolded. Only then did Liam finally emerge, but his eyes held nothing but contempt when they landed on Emma. "I won't raise another man's child," he stated flatly. "Give up already." Emma collapsed into tears, trying desperately to throw herself into his arms. "Liam, you can't say that. This is your baby. You can't abandon us." Liam stood firm, armed with the DNA test results. How did two people with single eyelids suddenly have a baby with double eyelids? Explain that genetic impossibility. His voice was cold with certainty. Emma had never been a good student. She didn't understand the science behind what he was saying. All she knew was that she couldn't let him go. The Miller home had given her comfort and luxury she'd never known before. Returning to her poor life wasn't an option. Liam was her only chance at keeping her comfortable lifestyle. "You're looking for reasons to leave me, aren't you?" she accused desperately. "It's because of Nina. You think I'm not pretty anymore after having the baby. You want her back." Watching this scene unfold from within the crowd, I felt disgust rise in my throat. These two were living in complete fantasy worlds. I quietly backed away, wanting nothing to do with their drama. Just then, someone from the crowd called out, "Miss, weren't you paying attention in biology class? Two people with single eyelids can't have a baby with double eyelids. You should go find the real father." The gathered onlookers burst into laughter. Emma's face shifted from embarrassed red to sickly white. No wonder the Millers had left her at the hospital. They'd already figured out the truth. Clutching the baby tightly, she hurried away, too ashamed to even look up. I thought this marked the end of my involvement, but Liam sought me out again. "Nina, I was wrong," he admitted. "I never thought Emma would be that kind of person. I can't believe I treated you so badly because of her. Can you forgive me?" I frowned silently. Liam pressed on. "If only you had stopped me back then." This timeline had indeed taken a completely different path because I hadn't interfered. Liam had fallen from being the golden boy with a bright future to a high school dropout with nothing. The baby he'd cared for wasn't even his. He'd lost all his former pride. "Can we go back to how things were?" he asked softly. Instead of answering, I asked directly, "Was it you who sent someone to break my arm before the college entrance exams?" Liam's eyes darted away, his silence telling me everything I needed to know. I had security remove him immediately. That summer, I joined my father's company, using knowledge from my past life to target and capture the Millers' key business deals, speeding up their financial collapse. On the very day the Miller family declared bankruptcy, police officers arrived with handcuffs, arresting Liam for planning the attack against me. The attack before my exams hadn't been random after all. The hired thug had finally broken down in prison, revealing everything. Liam had orchestrated it all. His parents were already devastated by their financial ruin, but his arrest crushed whatever remained of their world. Mrs. Miller completely snapped under the pressure. One morning, news reports showed chilling security footage. A car deliberately running over a young mother and her child multiple times. The driver was unmistakably Mrs. Miller, and the victims were Emma and her baby. I set my phone aside, closing this chapter of my life for good. Their family no longer existed in my world. As summer faded into fall, I began classes at my dream university. College life suited me perfectly. I connected easily with my roommates and threw myself into campus activities. During breaks, I applied myself at my father's company, where he frequently praised my natural business instinct. Soon enough, he entrusted me with handling core operations. My mind occasionally drifted back to my previous life, triggered by something Liam once said: "A woman should have a stable job." Back then, I'd chosen the safe path of becoming a university professor rather than entering the business world. Meanwhile, Liam had shadowed my father, pretending to possess skills he never had, eventually earning Dad's complete trust. After my death in that timeline, my grief-stricken father had handed everything over to Liam, causing our family's rapid downfall. This time around, I leveraged my knowledge of future trends to invest in emerging industries, building substantial wealth. My success turned me into a business oracle of sorts. People tracked my every investment, hoping to ride my coattails to prosperity. My achievements attracted numerous admirers. One evening, while enjoying dinner with a potential suitor at an upscale restaurant, I spotted a familiar face among the staff. Liam was working as a busboy, carrying stacks of dirty plates. His prison record had made finding decent employment impossible. When our eyes met across the crowded dining room, he froze in place. His hands trembled, and his grip loosened. The stack of plates he'd been carrying crashed to the floor, shattering the momentary silence.